Episode 1, The Return to Ashcroft. Evelyn Harper hadn't returned to Ashcroft in almost 20 years, not since her mother had moved her to the city, away from the shadows that lurked in their old town. She remembered how her mother used to talk about Ashcroft, her voice tinged with fear, though at the time, Evelyn hadn't understood why. As she sat on the nearly empty bus heading toward the town she once called home, she felt that same fear creeping into her chest. The bus rattled along the narrow, overgrown road, the dense forest on either side pressing in closer with every mile. The trees looked different than she remembered, taller, darker, as if they had grown wild and untamed over the years. The air inside the bus was heavy, the kind of damp, humid air that clung to her skin. Outside, the sky was a dull, clouded gray, casting an eerie, pale light over everything. She checked her phone for the 100th time. No signal. Not surprising, considering how remote Ashcroft was, but still, the isolation made her uneasy. There were only a few other passengers on the bus, and they all seemed as uneasy as she felt, their eyes darting around nervously as if they, too, could feel something was wrong. The bus lurched to a stop at the town's entrance, a rusted sign barely visible through the overgrown foliage, "Welcome to Ashcroft." The town had an unsettling stillness, as though it had been frozen in time. The streets were empty, the buildings worn down and decrepit. The once vibrant town square looked desolate, with boarded-up windows and cracked sidewalks. It was hard to believe this was the same place she had once called home. She stepped off the bus, her boots hitting the cracked pavement with a soft thud. The bus driver gave her a brief nod before driving off, leaving her standing alone in the quiet town. Evelyn adjusted her bag on her shoulder and took a deep breath, trying to shake the growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. Her first stop was supposed to be the Ashcroft Gazette, where she had an appointment with the editor, Mr. Marlowe. She had contacted him weeks ago, telling him she was a freelance journalist researching the strange disappearances in small towns. Of course, she hadn't told him the real reason she was here. She was here to find out the truth about her father's disappearance all those years ago, something no one in Ashcroft had ever been able to explain. The Gazette was located just off the main square, a small, unassuming brick building that looked as though it hadn't been updated in decades. The windows were dusty, and the door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of old paper and ink filled her nose, and the dim lighting cast long shadows over the cluttered desks. "Can I help you?" A voice called from the back. A man in his 50s, with graying hair and a thick mustache, stepped out from behind a desk. He wiped his hands on his shirt, leaving smudges of ink on the fabric. "I'm Evelyn Harper. I called about an interview," she said, stepping forward and offering her hand. He eyed her hand for a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, but his eyes were tired, as though the weight of something heavy rested on his shoulders. "Ah, right. You're the one interested in the disappearances." "That's right," Evelyn replied, her tone even. "I was hoping to get more information about the recent cases." Marlowe led her to a small office in the back, cluttered with old newspapers and file folders. He gestured for her to sit down, and then sat across from her, his face serious. "We don't get many journalists out here," he began. "Ashcroft isn't exactly the kind of place that attracts attention, especially with everything that's been going on lately." Evelyn nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here. I've heard there have been several recent disappearances, and I wanted to get the story straight from the source." Marlowe leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "It's more than just recent disappearances. People have been going missing from Ashcroft for as long as I can remember. Some folks say it's a curse. Others say it's something in the woods." Evelyn frowned. "Something in the woods?" He nodded grimly. "The locals call it the Whispering Shadows. It's been part of our folklore for generations. My grandmother used to tell me stories about it when I was a kid, how it would come out of the woods at night, how it would take people, and they'd never be seen again." Evelyn leaned forward. "You don't believe that, do you?" Marlowe sighed. "I didn't. Not at first. But after everything I've seen, I don't know what to believe anymore." Just then, the bell above the door jingled, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, with dark hair and deep-set eyes. He glanced around the room before his gaze settled on Evelyn. She froze for a moment. She recognized him. Lucas Dyer. They had grown up together in Ashcroft, though they hadn't been particularly close. He had always been the quiet one, the one who kept to himself. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and rough. "You shouldn't have come back." Evelyn stood up, facing him. "Lucas, I need to know the truth. What's happening in this town?" Lucas's eyes darted toward the window, and Evelyn noticed for the first time how pale he looked, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "It's not safe here," he whispered. "The shadows, they're watching." "The shadows?" Evelyn repeated, her pulse quickening. Lucas nodded. "You need to leave, Evelyn. Before it's too late." Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from the street outside, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Evelyn and Lucas both turned toward the door, but before they could react, the lights in the office flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from outside, a low, guttural whisper reached their ears. It was a voice, no, voices, so many, speaking at once, in a language Evelyn couldn't understand. Her heart pounded in her chest as the whispers grew louder and closer. Lucas grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back door. "We need to go, now." Evelyn's mind raced as she stumbled after him, her vision adjusting to the dim light filtering through the window. Outside, the shadows moved. They weren't human. They weren't even alive. They slithered across the street, their forms twisting and merging in the darkness, like smoke or mist. "Run!" Lucas shouted, shoving her out the door. As they sprinted down the alley, Evelyn glanced back and saw the shadows closing in, their whispering voices filling the air around her. She ran faster, her lungs burning, her legs aching. She didn't know where they were going, she only knew they had to escape. End of episode 1.